Hi, welcome to OLT 321, European Literature. Today I'd like to give you a little more historical background information on the rise of the European novel. You may have read about this in Lecture 1 of the course materials. Without making a deep historical examination, I want to clarify a few comments from that lecture. You may have heard of the Roman Empire, and if you've seen any movies like Gladiator, then you know which guys we're talking about. At the height of their power, the Romans controlled many areas in Europe. They had a very strong army which did its best to keep out groups that also wanted land. For various reasons, the Roman Empire began to collapse, and Germanic tribes began to invade. By 476 AD, which is about 1,600 years ago, the Roman Empire had completely collapsed. Now these tribes came into these lands in Europe and tried to control them. What made it easier for them to control was when they converted to Christianity. When they converted to Christianity, the local priests, representatives of the church, helped them control the population. Charles the Great was the most powerful of these rulers, and you may know him by his more common name as Charlemagne or Charlemagne. In 800, he protected the Pope from rebels, and as a reward, the Pope proclaimed him Holy Roman Emperor over most of the same lands that the Romans had controlled. It was a big, fancy title indeed, and to live up to it, he founded schools, because he believed in education. And also, he had old books with all the ancient learning copied. Now, at the time, books were copied by hand. That's right, by hand. No photocopiers, no printing press, nothing. So books were extremely expensive. Very few people even owned a book, and if there was a book available, of course, it was the Bible. Monks, who were scribes, were the ones who did most of the copying. The word scribe means someone who writes, and we get many words from that word, like subscription, inscription, inscribe, describe. After Charlemagne's death in 814, his sons divided the empire, and thus it became much weaker and made it vulnerable to invasion. From the east came Magyars, from the south came Arabs, and from the north came the Vikings. It grew out of the fact that there were many small towns and kingdoms which could not defend themselves alone. The Germanic kings also had a practice of making warriors swear an oath of loyalty, in exchange for which the king gave them lands. Then these warriors would have the lands farmed, and the money they made from the farming helped them buy their fighting equipment. I mean, it's expensive to be a soldier. You need swords and armor and shields and horses and people to take care of those things, you know. So it's a lot of money involved, and you just can't raise it on your own. So in this way, the soldier would fight for the king when the king needed it. And in exchange, if the soldier or knight was in trouble, the king would help him. This land was called a fief. And from it also, the soldier or knight would pay his taxes. From the top down, the king would divide up his lands and give some of it to lords in exchange for an oath of loyalty. And then the lords would also give some of their land to smaller lords and get an oath of loyalty from them. So you've got one guy at the top, and then a few guys underneath him, and then each one of those guys has a few guys, and a few more, and a few more, and in the end you've got the whole country is divided up and accounted for. And in this way, the king has the support of many loyal soldiers and followers. At the very bottom were the serfs, and the serfs also swore an oath of loyalty to to their lord, and in exchange they would get a little piece of land which they could use to raise their own food, and then once or twice a week they would go and do work on the lord's lands. Feudalism wasn't a perfect system, but it did bring relative peace, and when you have peace you can start to have trade. So merchants would travel among the towns and among the countries, selling goods. The knight lived in a castle. Outside the castle grew up town.